that this piece lasted through the opening.
Why, you thought people would open it more?
Well, open it more, but sort of jar against the doors.
No, no.
Somehow they're so...
Do you like it better open or closed?
A little open, I think. What do you think?
I like it open.
Yeah.
Do you see all this inside?
Yes, exactly.
And this.
Exactly.
You don't just choose a material and say, hey, how about cows intestines?
Yes.
But there's a kind of process, an internal process that's going on in your work, and a curiosity to see if you can do what you've been doing with something else.
That's right. And that process takes time for it to feel credible. And that, you know, I need to have patience with that time before it indeed feels like something.
Right. And also you're working with bronze.
Yes.
For the first time. That's a big deal.
Yes. Yeah. My first bronze piece was commissioned by the T.F. Green Airport, where the piece now stands in Warwick, Rhode Island. It was all made out of cedar, out of 4x4 beams of cedar that I cut and stacked, glued, and then it was all brought to the foundry, but it was all brought to the foundry in separate sections and then cast. And it was made on a rectangular piece of grass. It's like an island that's at the edge of the parking lot and just at the entrance, the main entrance of the airport. And it stands kind of high and proud above a lot of the traffic that goes by. Bronze is sort of has the durability of hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of years. But I think a really more important one is that there are structures that I have found, and this is only the second piece in bronze that I've cast, that for me actually work better in bronze. And in part because of the patinaing process of allowing that metal to speak, allowing that metal to show through and not to be choked by the patina covering. I do think, though, that there is a link between what I do and the myth of what I think might be ancient Polish objects. That there might be a relationship between what I do and implements that were used to work the earth. That there might be a relationship between what I do and domestic implements used by women over the ages to do chores, whether it's washing, you know, on a washboard or mixing in a bowl. So I'm in my country studio where the atmosphere is really very different from what it is in Brooklyn and Williamsburg. And it was a context that I was afraid of for many, many years. And I think I've been able, in as much as I've spent a couple of summers here working, I think I've been able to break it in a way where I feel the comforts that are possible to feel from this environment and am still able to work. Because it seemed that at one time it was the kind of anxious place, the brick walls, the geometry and the hard surfaces that made me react to what was there. And of course, there's nothing like that in this environment. I especially had I designed the studio so that the walls would raise up for 14 feet so that I'd be able to draw on them. I designed it so that so that there's air that flows between, and as much as we create so much sawdust that it makes it a much healthier situation, but also so that I could negotiate with the outside to some extent if I wanted to. This is a piece that I've been working on that's made out of the intestine of a cow, and these are the vein patterns of the large intestine that actually either have exploded, dissolved, or more likely have been eaten by something that's in my studio, probably a mouse, because that's the fatty part. That's not the skin part, it's the fatty part of it. But I was going to use it as an extension of a drawing. I have a background for it out of which this eases out. But in the end, that ended up being a very sort of corny use of this. So I think that there's something else in store for this piece. And this piece, too, is string that I've covered with the skin of the intestine, and the same thing occurred to it, you know, that the fatty parts have been eaten away by some animal. But again, I'm going to use it for something, and I'm still waiting for it to kind of let me know what the best context is for it. I made this corrugated paddle before I ever saw a tool that I have since seen many times in Poland called the maglovnica. I mean, the good thing is it's got its neck, its head cut in many places, so it makes a slight curve, and it's got a handle. But obviously it's related to the maglovnica, but I never saw one when I made this. This tool is a slender paddle with a handle on it that has a corrugation on its face that's used to rub damp linen, damp sheets that are wrapped around a bat as soon as they're washed to make them softer. And that piece, I'm just fooling around. There's something like a maglovnica underneath it, and I put stretched skin over it, but it's still nowhere. And actually, at one time, it was a chair. It was the back of a chair. But chairs are not for me. So I hope to make it into something that's a little bit more sexy, but maybe it'll go nowhere. But I'm starting to get a surface that might go somewhere. And this is a drawing. I had many of these on the floor. It's almost like, I don't know what it is. It's almost like very primitive patterns that one might see in weavings. You can see these kind of V-forms, but again, I think I'm even being too explicit. And the whole imagery is sort of very primitive, very fleshy, done with my hands. I dip the hands into the dark India ink substance that's almost like a gluey substance. It's an archival paste, and then I just flop my hands all over to get this pattern. And these are additional kind of hangings for this drawing, just as I have additional hangings for a lot of the other drawings. It's almost like the idea of having a slip hang lower, just a little below your dress, and that slip really is a part of everything that's going on. That's just as important, obviously, as the dress itself. But it's kind of more secret. It's a more private thing. And in the house, there's a knit thing that as you walk in, there's a banister. There's a huge knit thing that my mother knit from every scrap of yarn that she had in the house. You know, so there's like hundreds of colors in this thing. But you can unfold it, and that's kind of the, I don't know, it just sort of is a concentrated thing of maybe her life, maybe part of my life. I'm being very dramatic in saying this, but take a look at it anyway.
In this case, it really has been a first to do something personal for our property here. And I'd known Ursula. We'd worked together at Cap Street, so that I knew her work and I knew her process. We talked about it for many years, off and on. And I went to visit her in New York, and she said, well, I'm ready to come. So I was pleased with that, and she'd been out here several times and seen the property, but it had been in the winter, so the trees were not the way they are today. They were kind of dormant, and she picked the site out there on the hill, and I thought that was a fine site. But then when she came out this time, it looked quite different, and also the trees are getting a little bigger. So we stuck with the site, and I know that she doesn't make drawings or any kind of formal presentation, and I said, well, what kind of a piece are you thinking about? And she said, well, something about 47 by 23 by 8. Well, I sort of, my heart kind of stopped a little bit, and I thought, that's a big piece, and I like the idea of a big piece, but I figured it was probably bigger than the whole house. So knowing the way artists work, I said, well, I'm sure when you get out here, the site and everything will dictate the right proportions for the piece.
It's the glory site of the orchard. It's the glory site of the land. It's the highest point, other than the point that's near the road, which is really not nearly as attractive as this. I'm surrounded by a grid of trees, and I actually took what I conceived of as a kind of grid, you know, and sort of tore it apart or tangled with it a little bit so it looks really disrupted. But it essentially folds into the grid that exists with the apple trees. And it's almost like, even though it feels like a big herd in terms of the numbers, but it's a mass that really sort of weaves into the orchard in a way that's relatively subdued. And I think one of the nice things too is you can walk into this grid. It's a maze that you can walk through, that you can sort of feel the inside of the piece, so that you can also experience the grid kind of falling apart. You know, like there's an inside part of the piece that I call the parting of the waves, which is a little dramatic name for what happens, but it feels a little like that to me.
Her work is extremely labor intensive, and it also draws in lots of people, and I was very much drawn into the process, and she throws herself into it, and her unrelenting kind of aesthetic rigor and work ethic combined is just enormously appealing to me. I think it's a privilege to see how people make their work, all the different parts. I mean, the piece gets assembled and it gets taken apart, reassembled, laminated. Now they're doing the graphiting, and then in this case it'll be particularly difficult because it's on uneven property, and it's a departure for her. But we didn't exactly discuss that. She just takes every piece, I think, as more of a challenge, each one. To me, it's a labor of love. It's also made out of a material that I'm very involved with. My family is in the timber growing business. We don't grow this particular kind of wood, but it's still wood. And to see her craft it and distress it and reconfigure it, it's very heartening to me. You know, you see the tree growing, you cut the tree down, and then you reassemble it in a marvelous way that has another life. So it's a rebirth of a familiar element.
What I'd like is basically where we are, but deformed somewhat. And one of us has to be a little bit on top of the wall here because I'd like to stretch it as far back as we can. And this thing is just a little shy of the width that we want the piece to be, okay? So let's just go. Okay, yes. Okay, hold it. Yeah, that's pretty good. Actually, I wanted, because we're going to need one more circle. No, more toward that circle, so we need one more. Can everybody step? No, we'll do it again, but we'll go closer to that circle. Okay. Okay. Yeah, that's pretty good. Yeah, he should be almost on top of the wall. Maybe you can get closer to the wall, Ruben. Can you? Take the other foot off. Yeah, that's it. Maybe you can put one foot right on top of the wall. That's it. That's it. I'll trace my own first. If you can do, or good, Dave, you can. Okay. This is just obviously a spring bowl. Okay, Arturo. Ruben, maybe a big one. Okay, I'm gonna put it down. A little further up. Back. Maybe 154. Okay. I think that's enough. We'll put this up. I think we won't use that. In fact, I think we're going to do this whole circle over again. Let's forget about this. I consider this almost like a wall, a very thick, organic, wandering wall. And it gives me a place to anchor that wall to the ground, even though I'm always fudging and not following the line, but it at least gives me a starting point for that. And then it wanders away from it, depending on what else happens with the visuals of that wall. Are you pretty parallel?
Yeah.
Okay. I often respond to the last pieces that I've made, and I feel like the two pieces that have most affected and influenced the final image of this piece is Doolin, which I just made this last winter, and Handy Over, which I made in Providence the winter before. Handy Over is a series of cups, low cups that have a bottom. And Doolin is actually script that's written by somebody who's almost illiterate, where the actual letters become walls that grow up and no longer are identifiable as letters, which I had intended. This is neither really, but it's obviously affected by both. So I did both the circular structure that I worked on with Handy Over, as well as the inscribed or written portions of words that I wove in. I've deliberately made some walls a little shorter than other walls so that you'll see that horizontal layering as you walk by it, so that the scale is indeed a very human scale. That scale is not overpowering, is not aggressive. I think that scale reconfirms, our humanness, our vulnerability. And I think that that scale has inherent in it a kind of beckoning and makes for interactive possibilities, again, in terms of people walking close to it, people sitting on top of it, and so on. The piece is going to be located at the Microsoft campus near Seattle. And there's going to be a circle that's built with a cement curb around it that's 120 feet wide. It's kind of a centrally located circle for that part of the campus, with many buildings that are built around it that'll look down onto that circle, so that a critical viewing vantage for me in making this piece is the top vantage point, that is from the second floor, the third floor, the fifth floor of the buildings which surround this piece. There will also be a promenade that'll be around the 120-foot circle so that people will be able to see into it. The opportunity to spread out like this within the circle was a wonderful opportunity for me. So that in some ways I am wandering in a circular path within this 120-foot circle, and that this 120-foot circle is strictly a piece of geometry. It's a very strict circle. So within that, I'm drawing something that is very much less orthodox, much more idiosyncratic, that it makes, that the circle I make inside of that circle is mine, and I think will stand out as being something that really does have a different feeling from some of the other contexts in which it is found.